going on, guys? Rob Pizzo in studio. Morgan Campbell joining us via the magic of the internet. How are you, Morgan?
I'm very good. How are you guys?
We're doing good. Let's get right to it. Another Diamond League in the books. This one from Silesia, Poland. And you know where I'm going to start. Women's 100 meter. I'm not sure if you've heard of the two people who ended up finishing 1-2 in ShaCarri and Shericka. Putting on a show as a little bit of a preview of what we're going to see in Budapest. ShaCarri wins again, undefeated on the season. Your thoughts on the women's 100?
One of the things that impresses me about this performance from ShaCarri Richardson is that, again, if we look at how her seasons typically go, this is the part of the year where she usually hits a plateau and starts backtracking. But right now, she's running as fast as she has ever run, and she's like maintaining these fast times deep into July. So every performance like this deep into the season has to be very encouraging for her and her team. And like Shericka Jackson, she ran 10:78. Like that is a very good time. Like, because I'm sure some people are asking, well, what's wrong with Shericka Jackson? Nothing. Yeah, what it does set up, if each of these two can stay healthy and each of these two can stay clean through the rounds in Budapest, is an incredible women's 100 meter final later this summer.
All right, let's shift to the men. Stop me if you've heard this. Was supposed to be a star-studded event, but in the end, no Noah Lyles, no Christian Coleman. They added our buddy Charleston, doing the Charleston again. I had to bring that up.
Yes.
Joke that I'm going to use for the rest of the year. But Simbine with the win in that one in what was just a crazy close finish. I love when you have to go to a photo finish to see who finished first and who finished fifth. But your thoughts on this one?
I think what people forget is when an athlete is as dominant as Fred Kerley has been the last year or so, it's easy to forget that the other athletes are world class too. Yeah. And it's easy to forget like how thin the margins are, because again, now I'm sure there's going to be people asking, well, what's wrong with Fred Kerley? Not necessarily anything. And again, two things. One, each of these races is, if it's like a boxing match, each of these is like a round in a fight as opposed to the whole fight itself. And two, what you have are a lot of sprinters at kind of different stages in their development because they're all trying to peak for mid-August. So this is an intriguing result, but if you're a Fred Kerley fan, it's not time to panic.
Real quick before we move on, I gotta ask you this because I looked at the start list early in the week and I said, wow, this is gonna be great for the 100 in both the women and the men. And we've seen this quite a bit in the Diamond League this year, and I know it's not that out of the ordinary, but how do you sell a sport? How do you tell people go buy tickets to watch this 100 meter final and constantly have people dropping out? I mean, it's gotta be tough.
Well, part of what every athlete has to do is manage the business side of the sport with the performance side of the sport. So there are a lot of times when, from a performance standpoint, again, especially when you're talking about peaking later in the year, it doesn't make sense to race every single race because you might need to go train. You might need to be in one place instead of traveling. And so for Talu, for Noah Lyles, for Christian Coleman, it might have made performance sense to them to skip this one, keep training, stay in the US, stay wherever the training base is, don't get on a plane to go to Poland. But for other people who need to make a name for themselves, who just need to make money, it might make a lot more sense. Now, those people tend to be a little bit less famous, but that is sort of the nature of the sport. I think from a meet organizer standpoint, I mean, the most important part is that you get more than one star. The men's 100 is maybe more of a dilemma because you had Curley, but you didn't necessarily have a foil for Curley. Whereas in the women's 100, you had Shericka, you had ShaCarri, and regardless of what anyone else is doing, as long as you got Shericka and ShaCarri, you've got a marquee matchup.
One guy who did not skip this event, Jakob Ingebrigtsen. We've talked about him so much, but let's be honest here, Morgan. We're a track show. Of course, we're going to talk about him, but he wins the 1500 again. Fourth fastest time ever. He now moves to fourth all time and wins in that department. We're watching greatness right now with Ingebrigtsen, and no one's talking about it. Is it just the fact that, all due respect to the 1500, I can't run the 1500, but is it just not one of those marquee events, so you've got a guy who's one of the all-time greats really not get the credit he deserves?
Two things. Yeah, well, to mainstream North American sports fans, they're not talking about it because mainstream sports fans, they understand the 100 meters and they understand the marathon, where they can take an interest in those two events, like at the extremes, and then everything else in between kind of gets lost if you're a runner. But I can promise you in Norway, he's making huge headlines. And again, in other countries, like outside the United States, the performer makes an event marquee if the person is from that country. So I'm sure back in Norway, men's 1500 meters, that's like Major League Baseball is, that's like the NFL. Like people pay attention because Ingebrigtsen's doing it. And one of the other problems for Ingebrigtsen, at least in terms of getting attention in North America, is that he hasn't broken the world record yet. And that is one of the other languages that mainstream sports fans speak. So he could be a dominant performer, and the average mainstream fan will be like, well, how good is he? He does not even have the world record. That's kind of the language they speak, is 100 meters, marathon, world record.
Thanks so much, Morgan. Talk to you next week.
All right, thanks, Rob.
Okay, that's the end of the video, but you're not at the finish line yet because we've got plenty more content. And if you want to see it, subscribe to the channel and just look at all the videos you can watch. Morgan and myself, talking track.